Hello, welcome to the Big Bag. This is your T20 cricket show. My name's Mark Machado, who you may or may not know from the Murali end. And I'm joined by Towid Qureshi, who you may or may not know as a top journalist following Bangladesh, the Bangladesh side. We are here to kind of get reaction from what was actually quite a barnstorming fixture between Afghanistan and Bangladesh in the group stages of the Asia Cup. If you're watching, if you're listening, wherever you're watching, listening first, please do hit that subscribe. And secondly, leave us your comments, leave us your thoughts. We might invite some of you guys on and chuck the studio link in as well. See how it goes. This is the kind of first time this channel's kind of breached out to do this kind of content. Reactionary content that isn't Sri Lanka cricket before, so let's see how we go with it. Terry, you must be quite a happy man at this moment in time.
Yeah, happy and I guess unexpectedly happy. I mean, after that trouncing against Sri Lanka just a few days ago, I think there was such little expectation. Well, certainly from me in terms of getting a positive result out of this game. But yeah, I mean, Bangladesh, pulled it out the bag. I wasn't expecting much from them, as I say, particularly against an Afghanistan team who they have struggled against traditionally in the past. We know what their spinners can do in the middle overs, and actually, I'm sure we'll come on to it, but the way the game played out almost kind of followed the template that you'd kind of expect, i.e., Rashid Khan, Noor Ahmed played really well as well, bowled very well, kind of strangling Bangladesh after a good start in those middle overs. But, they just about, I thought, scraped a decent total onto the board.
When was the moment you started to believe? Because me and you were kind of texting. I didn't want to message you too much during it because I didn't want to pile on the misery or otherwise. Because when was the moment you thought this is on?
Yeah, I mean, at halfway stage, I thought they were a bit light in terms of, that they got off to such a good start. I thought, they could have got up to 170, maybe even 180 if they'd have batted really well. I mean, they played both of their power plays were good, right? So their batting power play was good, and also, the bowling power play as well, having Sri Lanka 2 wickets down for not very many after that power play. I'm just trying to look at what the score was after 6 overs. I can't quite find it, but yeah, they didn't have too many on the board. 2 wickets down. I thought Nasim Ahmed bowled really well in that power play. So yeah, that certainly gave me hope. I'd say those first 6 overs.
What really impresses me as a Sri Lanka fan, seeing from both these teams, is, and we probably saw this a little bit more from Bangladesh against Sri Lanka than we needed to today, but we saw a lot from. I felt we saw a lot from Afghanistan today. Is the ability to kind of rebuild an innings, and not kind of, not one doesn't lead to necessarily to two, and it wasn't until that kind of penultimate fizz over from the fizz that you thought Afghanistan are out from it, out of this, right? I'm super impressed with the way the intent that both these teams can show, and I think that's what kind of made it such a good contest in the end, right?
Absolutely. I mean, for Bangladesh, let's make no bones about it, it's a must-win, right? Their last group game. If they'd have lost today, that was it. That's the end of the Asia Cup. Doesn't matter what happens in the last round of group games. But as it stands, they live to fight on at least for another day or two, and it all hinges on that last game between Sri Lanka and Afghanistan.
Never ever rely on the Sri Lankan cricket team. Like,
well, we were just talking about this, weren't we? There's so much made about this Sri Lankan Bangladesh rivalry, and yeah, well, I'm sure we might talk about that in a bit of depth. I think some of it is a bit kind of fake.
it is, but I'll be honest, right? I absolutely love it. I adore it because, there is
I'm kind of split. I'm kind of split. I'd say. I think what I would really like to see is a rivalry that's kind of based on kind of real quality cricket behind it, whereby you've got two absolute, or at least a couple of players on each team who are absolute sort of gun players, who are really each time they sort of face up, each time there's those sorts of matchups, there's a real kind of big deal around it. Whereas this, for me, it feels like it's a little bit, let's face it, the whole nuggin dance, it's all a bit school playground for me.
I
But
saw a bit of that in the crowd today. I mean, is that just something Bangladeshi fans do now?
it must be, particularly those in the UAE. But yeah, it's yes, it's a good thing for sure in some respects. But yeah, I think we've gone off on a tangent, haven't we? But because what we were saying at the start was that Bangladesh fans will have to be supporting Sri Lanka in that very last game against Afghanistan, because they want Sri Lanka to go through. And yeah.
Yeah. So I think the other thing it's worth discussing is that, and we'll get back to the kind of the more cricket side of it in a bit, is because of it's not even the politics, it's just because of the sheer TV money that's associated with India and Pakistan. It means that the draw is always, well, it's not really a draw at all, is it? It's always rigged. And it means that actually the four best teams in this tournament are definitely India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka. And definitely one of those four teams will not be making it through because Pakistan and India have to be in the same group. I also was the other takeaway I had from watching this game is actually, and probably the team in the world that's helped the most is Afghanistan. So you look at their side and you think about how many of those players have come through and play franchise cricket all over the world and now playing in the IPL as well. And you do kind of, I know this show is meant to be about Bangladesh versus Afghanistan, but you do kind of start to feel a little bit sorry for the Pakistani players because you're just like, they're not able to develop the way that basically anyone else in the rest of the world is at this point, right?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of those sort of franchise gigs in the IPL, I suppose principally. I mean, there are certain parallels, I'd say, maybe with Bangladesh cricket as well, whereby you can count on one hand, basically on three fingers, the number of Bangladesh players who've played in the IPL. And you can count on zero fingers the number of Bangladesh players who've played in the 100, for example.
Yeah.
T20 Blast, I think, again, maybe only two or three. So actually, whereas you do get decent Pakistani representation in some of those kind of English competitions, certainly. So yeah, some parallels there for sure.
But I look at this Bangladesh team and I think there's about 4 or 5 absolute gun players in it, or like players that you don't want to have a good day against you. Ridley is the one that comes to mind. He seems to perennially play well against Sri Lanka, and I'd be worried about him if Sri Lanka have to play them again. Lytton Das has done it kind of for ages. Jaka Ali as well. He's somebody I quite like to watch. And I'm trying. Rashad Hussain is starting to give me nightmares as well. What has kind of gone wrong to the point that you're kind of relying on other results in this tournament?
It's a good question. I mean, yeah, you name some of those players there, and yeah, on their day, they're all can be gun players. I think for me, kind of a combination of things. I mean, I think they did kind of get away with it a little bit today, because you look at the they really rung the changes, didn't they? There were four changes that they made, and basically the big thing that they did was they didn't play a fifth bowler. And not only did they not play a fifth bowler, but those part-time options were just so part-time that it was a huge risk, which is basically what kind of let Afghanistan back into the contest after the sort of shortly after the power play in their batting innings, because you had the likes of Saif Hassan, Shamin Hussain as well, kind of chipping in to kind of give them 4 overs. They just about managed to do it, but it was a huge risk. So, yeah, I'd say, yeah, team composition still isn't quite there. Another general point I'd say is just kind of role definition and kind of enough players in that lineup really understanding their roles, because basically today they played 7 batters, and then the 4 sort of bowlers. I suppose Richard Hussain, you could say, is an all-rounder as well, but so kind of role definition. If you've got that many batters, it means that something's not quite going right in that top order, and I think that's certainly been the case. Certainly the case against Sri Lanka, where God, how many? 15 balls without managing to score a run. So yeah, there's been issues at the top of the order. Like I say, yeah, role definition for me is a big one, and you mentioned him there, like Towhid Ridoi. Really, really good player, like you say. I think he was he leading run scorer in the Lankan Premier League. I want to say
he was
2 or 3 years back.
Yeah, I think he was. I'll be honest. I was a bit. I don't know if you saw this, but last season, Angelo Matthews' brother got really upset that Shakib got a contract in the Lanka Premier League, and I keep saying, like, there's 2 players today who played in the game today who first came to my attention in the Lanka Premier League. Ridoi, though actually I think he'd already battered us at some point before that, but Gurbaz as well, the Afghan opener. And it kind of feels like a blessing and a curse to have these leagues sometimes, because you're like, what are we doing teaching these players how to play in our conditions? But I suppose it as a kind of more general cricket fan, it is good for the game, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just the point I was going to make on Towhid Ridoi is I'm still not absolutely sure what his role in this batting lineup is, if that sounds a bit kind of counterintuitive. Yeah, he's for me, he's an excellent timer. He's a stroke maker. He came in at number 4 today. What did he get? 26 off 20, which is kind of, it's not a match defining innings, is it? So I think he's still trying to work out what exactly his role in the team is, and I think it's also a case of the team management trying to make sure that they mould him and kind of give him enough direction as well.
Can I pick this comment up over here from Hassan? He said Bangladesh different gravy with Litton as skipper. Just like to get your thoughts on Litton Das as the skipper.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. He's Litton Das in general, basically Bangladesh is full of enigmas, players who are total enigmas, and Litton Das is right up there. It's like, well, for me, one of the biggest enigmas in Bangladesh cricket. You see him play and you think this guy should be an all format gun player. He should be, he can score red ball hundreds. He scored, I think now, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 red ball hundreds, test hundreds. And one day cricket, white ball cricket, you think he's such a sweet timer of the ball. He's got this kind of real velvet kind of touch about him. But again, I feel, forget about captaincy, but just purely as a player, for him to just end up basically where he's kind of ended up is as a kind of a T20 specialist. And for me, that just feels like he's massively undersold himself there. He's got so much potential to be a much more better player than he is. But in terms of his captaincy, I think he just about got it right. You could tell, it was a little bit formulaic what he was trying to do, because he was hampered with his bowling resources, wasn't he? So he knew that those last 4 overs had to be bowled by Fizz and Tuskin.
What's your take on that configuration of a team? Because I feel like I keep referring to Sri Lanka. I don't mean to talk about them, but our big criticism of the team this tournament has been that actually bowling's our strength, and we're not leaning into it by relying on the part timers to make up 4 overs. It feels ridiculous. It kind of worked for Bangladesh today, though, kind of, right?
Yeah, like I said up top, it just about worked. 8 runs isn't a huge margin of victory, is it? And I guess kind of looking at compared to the bowlers that they played in the last game. So yeah, they did have 5 kind of frontline bowlers essentially. Although they've rung a load of changes. So Shoreful played against Sri Lanka. He didn't play in this game. Tanzim Hassan, he didn't play in this game. Mehdi Hassan, he didn't play in this game. So yeah, they're really ringing the changes. And yeah, my preference is, you've got to go in with 5 bowlers, I think, even if, Rishad Hussain, a bowling all-rounder, even if a couple of those are bowling all-rounders, you've got to go in, I feel, with 5 bowlers, and they didn't do that today, and they just about got away with it.
Can we talk a little bit about the Fizz? I said to you before we came on air, I feel like he's been around for years and years and years. ESPN Cricinfo, who I don't think get these kind of things wrong, reckon he's 30 years old. I had a dad personally as at least 45. It feels like a lifetime ago when he was like, it felt there was a point when he was the most effective bowler in the world, especially in kind of T20 cricket. He had a lot of injuries, but he's kind of come back from that. And now today he's created a moment Bangladesh fans are going to be talking about for years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm astounded as well that he's 30 because, I'm with you. I feel, he's been around for ages. He had that sort of breakout. I think it was an Asia Cup, actually, that was his kind of breakout tournament, and probably going back close to sort of 8-9 years ago now. And then he kind of got those IPL gigs through that. So, like I say, one of the very few players who's kind of basically been an IPL regular. And yeah, you're right. He's had some injury issues. Also, I think after that first iteration of the Fizz, it was all about his off cutter. After a season or so in the IPL, people are going to work you out, and that's basically what happened. So he had to go away, kind of work on his game, and come back with more variations, more kind of tricks up his sleeve. So I guess the version of the Fizz you see now is probably maybe even the third version of the Fizz, where he's kind of basically increased his kind of variations, but also he's just got that experience, that nous, that basically went a long way to winning today's game. Because I was just sort of saying to you at the start, there was almost a point, I think it was the 16th over and the 17th over, which the Fizz and Tuskin bowled consecutively, and it was like, what are they doing? They were leaking runs. Rashid Khan started playing those no-look shots that kind of went for 6 and a 4, which was absolutely outrageous from him. So, they were starting to leak runs, and you're thinking, what is the Fizz doing? But, the Fizz is the Fizz. He knows exactly what he's doing. Bowled that sort of slower, pitched-up delivery to Rashid Khan, who just basically guided it to sort of wide slip, and then a wicket the very next ball, and that was kind of job done, really.
Yeah, there's a question coming for you, Tawhid. Why hasn't Nahid Rana been selected for the Asia Cup? That's from Hassan Sanuda asked that question as well. I don't know if you can shed any light on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'm a huge Nahid Rana fan. I think the way he burst onto the scene last year was unprecedented for a Bangladesh fast bowler to basically. So, going back to the Pakistan series that Bangladesh won 2-0 last year. And then the series that people kind of forget a little bit about because they only drew it 1-1 was in the Caribbean away to the West Indies. So basically in both of those series, he was the quickest bowler of any, on both sides for both of those series. So, phenomenal talent. I still think, and he has played a little bit of sort of T20 cricket. He's played a little bit of ODI stuff as well. I think, again, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think Bangladesh, the management are trying to kind of figure out exactly where he fits in plans. Plus, he's so young. He's probably not, just one stress fracture away from being sidelined for a very long time. So I'm quite glad that they're kind of wrapping him up in cotton wool a little bit. But having said that, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he kind of features in the T20 World Cup next year.
Is there? You said cotton wool. In some South Asian cricket cultures, there's absolutely no consideration for player welfare, and they'll just bowl them till they break, and then we'll all have a collective cry when they're injured. Is that something that is kind of considered in Bangladesh cricket culture?
Yeah, I'm not sure you could really say that it is. I think with Naid Rana, his workload was huge, sort of going back for about the last sort of 12 months, 18 months in international cricket. So, maybe it was just a sort of common sense decision. I'm not sure if he's carrying a niggle or two. He could well be. But yeah, I think, the tendency to flog your best bowler to death is definitely there in Bangladesh cricket. He's someone like Tuskin Ahmed, for example, who he's had, so many injuries. It's plagued his career. You look at how many games he's played, and you're like, hang on, he should be playing or should have played sort of 3 or 4 times the number of games internationals that he has. But that's because of his injuries. Whether that's mismanagement, maybe that comes into it. But I think his body in particular is kind of prone to injury.
I'm just going to stick the link into the comments section. If you want to join us for a chat about today's game, please do. I wanted to ask Tony, did you see Jonathan Trott's comments before the game?
What was he saying?
So the press conference, there was this odd bit in the press conference where he basically said Afghanistan are the kind of only major team never to have won the Asia Cup, and then someone goes, "What about Bangladesh?" And he kind of implied that. He said that he thought Bangladesh had won some format or iteration of the Asia Cup. It's unclear to me watching it whether he generally thought that or whether he was kind of ribbing, trying to have a bit of a dig at Bangladesh. I just wanted to know if that had kind of come onto your radar, resonated in any way, and if there was any sort of needle between these two sides.
Well, it hadn't, no, but in terms of needle, yeah, absolutely. I think in some ways, we can maybe overplay some of these rivalries, can't we? We've sort of spoken about Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. But for me, yeah, I'd say from more of a sort of cricketing point of view, I'd say the Afghanistan-Bangladesh rivalry, not necessarily a bigger one, but certainly a more relevant one in terms of the way that I see it. I think kind of Afghanistan have kind of usurped Bangladesh's position within the global cricket order. You look at, particularly in tournaments, you look at Afghanistan, fantastic in the last 50 over World Cup, and causing upsets all the time, beating sort of more fancy teams, and really you think, well, that was a sort of the thing that Bangladesh used to do, maybe sort of, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10, mid 2010s kind of thing, and I think there's been, I'll be honest, I think there has been a subtle kind of shift in position between those two teams. So, and I think there has, that has naturally kind of led to quite an intense rivalry between the two teams. I think the other thing that I've picked up on, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, sorry, is that I think there's a little bit of, I don't know how to describe it, resentment maybe, or just lingering, it might even be jealousy, but towards how Afghanistan have developed as well in terms of, I think certainly within Bangladesh, there's a sense that, and I'm not saying that this is the case or it isn't, but I think there's
Yeah.
a sense that they've basically been a bit of a BCCI proxy in terms of the amount of support, the amount of resource that's been kind of poured into Afghanistan cricket from India has kind of given them an advantage over other teams in the region. So you think about the fact that they played. I don't know if they still do, but they played a lot of their international games in India, haven't they? So, and we know how India feels about some of its other neighbours. So it's yeah, I think there's a little bit of a lingering kind of sense that they've been favoured for whatever reason in this kind of weird cricket kind of Cold War that we kind of live in, I guess. So yeah, there's definitely a rivalry there for sure.
It's interesting because I think when you think about kind of, I want to let's call it Asian cricket at the moment, because I don't know if Afghanistan is really South Asia anymore, because it's kind of north of the Himalayas, right? But they produce players that are totally different to what, like, Bangladeshi players and Sri Lankan players are kind of interchangeable, and I think that's maybe part of where the rivalry stems from as well. It's like you're going to get some mystery spin, and you're going to get some very technically astute batters. You're probably not going to get too many bulldozing batters who are going to muscle it over, but that's kind of all right because the technique should be enough. Where in Afghanistan, you just get, it appears to me, obviously, they have got some incredible spinners as well, but you just get these absolute beast of men who can just find boundaries almost at will, like Noor Ahmed was doing right at the end at the end there, right? So I mean, obviously, I'm not saying Afghanistan aren't a nation team, but it's quite different, like the way they're playing. I've tried to look into how, because they, obviously Afghanistan turn up at under-19 World Cups and stuff like that. I've tried to figure out where these players come from and how they get them, and it's really difficult to work out the system, because from my understanding, and if you got any insight on this, I'd love to know. Essentially, Afghanistan is run as a team in exile, right? Because I think all the board members of the Afghan Cricket Board actually live in the UAE, potentially Pakistan and India, and possibly even in Australia there. And the relationship cricket has with the Taliban is quite strange, because the Taliban essentially don't like cricket, but they realised cricket's too popular for them to be able to shut it down, right? Which is part, which there was the whole debate about the Afghan women's side. I think actually today it got announced that they're going to play some games in India during the Women's World Cup in the next few weeks, which is obviously brilliant. But there was a whole debate about, we've got to keep the Afghan men's team going, because if you don't, then all cricket dies, and it's better to have something than everyone have nothing, right? That was the argument that was being made. So what I struggle with is firstly, there is an Afghan T20 league, isn't there?
Yes,
Afghan Premier
I've heard
League.
of it. I have heard of it, but where does it take place?
In Afghanistan,
right? Okay.
Because I've seen some of the commentators fly out there, and I know some of the Afghan players play in it. I know some of them can't play in it. I think Rashid Khan can't. Ironically, the one franchise league he can't play in is his kind of home. Well, I mean, I shouldn't laugh about it because it's actually quite a serious thing. And presumably,
is that because of kind of political threats?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think there's safety concerns. For him. But what I kind of can't understand is how come Afghanistan. Well, not that I can't understand. It's actually a kind of miracle, right? Is there's obviously resource issues in lots of parts of the cricket world, but there is so much chaos in Afghanistan compared to almost anywhere else in the cricket world. And it's so consistent, yet they can still consistently turn up with not just a full senior side, but also youth sides that are pretty handy, like and create good players, which from what my understanding is, there wasn't much cricket played in Afghanistan kind of 30 years ago. This is all something that's kind of popped up relatively recently and got so deep into the kind of membrane of the place that it looks to me like it's almost impossible to take out now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is, the Afghanistan cricket story, I think, well, it's difficult how you frame it, isn't it? Because of the whole women's team issue, which, we shouldn't and we won't kind of ignore or sideline at all. But I'd still say that, notwithstanding that, the Afghanistan cricket story is actually one of the few kind of real good news stories in kind of world cricket in the last, like you say, 20 or 30 years. Yeah, the fact that they can compete, again, we're talking about men's team here, obviously, but yeah, the fact that they can compete, the fact that they can compete so well and so consistently. Yeah, like you say, I have very little understanding of their domestic structure. I don't even know if they play any red ball cricket. If there's any first class cricket, I'd be quite surprised. But even the fact that they've got a T20 kind of league up and running, I mean, these are all it's quite a quite a mammoth achievement in kind of the grand scale of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we talk about the what happened? Oh, actually, I know what I was going to talk to you about. Talk about kind of the last thing on Afghanistan is. I always look at Bangladesh's coaches set up quite enviously. With Sri Lanka, we oscillate between picking the same old foreign coaches to picking a kind of local prominent uncle. We're an uncle pick at the moment. But with with Bangladesh, I feel like quite often your board manages to select really good people to look after things. I mean, you'll have had some great coaching setups over the years. I look at Phil Simmons, and I think that's a really solid pick.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting, isn't it, hearing other people's perspectives on from the outside looking in. I think that's fascinating because I'd probably say the opposite, and I'd probably say, oh, I look at Sri Lankan cricket, or I'll look at X country's cricket, and I'm quite envious of how stable your structures are, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, it's Bangladesh coaches are they've had some interesting ones. Obviously, we can't not discuss Hatteras Singh.
Oh yeah, please.
His two stints, which ended, well, his second stint ended almost about a year ago. So yeah, Phil Simmons basically came in last October, I want to say. So I remember flying out to Bangladesh. It was the start of a series against South Africa. They had a 2-test series. And I remember I was sort of asking Phil Simmons in the pre-match press conference. So he to his credit, he was, I really know very little about any of these players. So, this first test is just a bit of a watching brief sort of thing. But yeah, he's a I think he's a good pick, and you look at some of the results over the last 12 months. Again, there's been, I'd say, that tour of the West Indies, probably one of the best tours. Obviously, Bangladesh had beaten Pakistan 2-0 in a test earlier on last year, but certainly if you look across all formats in that Tour of the Caribbean towards the end of last year, that was probably one of the best tours that Bangladesh had ever been on. But that said, there's been a few lows as well, as is always sometimes the case. But yeah, he's an interesting pick because I've kind of see him. You look at his kind of recent coaching history leading up to the Bangladesh job, and he was basically coaching in the CPL and other kind of franchise kind of tournaments kind of here and there. So I don't know if this is an accurate assessment, but he's kind of a bit of a T20 specialist coach, you would sort of suggest. So, yeah, so my expectation would have been for Bangladesh to have kind of made greater strides, maybe within the sort of T20 format than maybe they have. But, you know, maybe we're seeing perhaps the start of that now.
So my take is that actually when I don't want to tarnish everyone. It's the more casual fan kind of feels, all right, you got Phil Simmons in, he's a T20 specialist, we should win the Asia Cup and then the World Cup. When actually in cricket, what your coach is really there to do is kind of almost be the head of strategy, right? And obviously he's going to figure out which players can play where and all that. But in terms of once you're selected for your national squad, a full ICC member level, you're not going to teach someone how to power hit someone.
No, absolutely, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, you know, what has happened or what is very gradually happening is this sort of subtle shift in, like you say, strategy, mindset. So, you know, Bangladesh have always, certainly in T20 cricket, they've never really, you know, played a kind of a T20 game that's, you know, I'd say it's still probably, I don't know, a decade behind what you see some, you know, teams like England, India, etc. Well,
why is that? Is that because you're so dominant at home? And
I'd say there's a couple of things. I'd say there's again, you know, this is just my view on it. I think there really is a kind of a natural conservatism that runs right the way through all of Bangladesh cricket, regardless of format. And what I mean by it, so it's more in terms of strategy and tactics. So, you know, you only need to look back to when was it? The last World Cup. So yeah, which I'm sure you'll remember. But I can't remember.
I haven't got time for that World Cup.
Well, no, I mean, just one small example was, so they were playing Afghanistan, weren't they, in the last game of the round robin phase of the last World Cup, and basically they had to beat Afghanistan by, you know, I think it was if they beat them within 30 overs or 35 overs, you know, then they'd have a superior run rate that potentially would get them into a World Cup semi-final. Never happened before in Bangladesh's history, and you know, they weren't a million miles away from it either. But there was this weird scenario, and I wrote about it. It was almost like they didn't want to kind of go for it. It was really strange. So they were in, you know, we're not going to say that, you know, they were definitely going to do it, but they didn't even bother trying.
Yeah, I remember
even though, you know, they probably had a 50-50 chance at best, but they did not even bother trying.
Was there much discourse after that game around within Bangladesh? because often
yeah, I mean, the team were definitely, yeah, they were definitely criticized for that. But again, yeah, probably not as much as they should have been. I mean, the ultimate kind of you know, rubbing salt into the wound, or, you know, the irony is that they lost the game anyway, right?
Yeah.
So their whole point of, you know, not, you know, basically they were playing conservatively because they just wanted to get whatever the target was, but they ended up losing against, you know, it was Afghanistan as well again. So yeah, it was and, you know, that's just one small example. I think that sort of, you know, safety first kind of conservatism is kind of runs throughout. But, you know, going back to Phil Simmons, I think the hope is that you know, that's starting to change. You know, you're seeing, you know, you mentioned some of those sort of younger players at the start there who are starting to play the game a bit differently. And even actually today, you did see a bit of it. So during the, you know, if you rewind right to the start of the game, Saif Hassan who's just been drafted in a little bit from nowhere. Yeah, a bit of a weird pick for me. Anyway, he couldn't get Ballon d'Or. It's five balls or four balls had gone, and like, well, here we go again. And then he was dropped, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think it was the fifth ball of that first over. And then I was like, oh, here we go again. But actually, they kept going. They kept trying to get back on board. They kept going for their shots, basically, which wasn't the case against Sri Lanka. And yeah, a little bit of luck. There were a couple of inside edges towards the start of that power play. Went for four, but they both got going and actually put up a pretty good stand for the first wicket, certainly by Bangladesh standards.
Yeah, I still stand by. I think, I've seen Bangladesh quite a bit recently now, mainly playing against Sri Lanka because obviously that is the default fixture for both those teams. But I'm impressed by the way they're able to rebuild innings. I think that's something that a lot. Well, maybe it's my bias because I watch Sri Lanka so much. Sri Lanka really struggle with it. But actually, because I know there's a whole school of thought out there, spearheaded by Jared Kimber, which is that Asian T20 cricket, if you take India out, is kind of a bit old-fashioned to be left behind. But actually, I'm not sure I really fully buy that, because I think it's that if you take the Asian teams out of it, you're kind of left with kind of four teams you might be able to do anything if you discount the West Indies. And of those four teams, I don't really fancy New Zealand at the moment. So really, it's kind of South Africa, Australia, and England. I'd say actually England are always scored the other way, where they're either going to score 300 or it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Where Asian sides are still, I think, kind of still in the
middling.
Middling. We can go, we can't go, and it's easy to characterize these teams as being bad. But actually, you turn up in Bangladesh and try and win a T20 series, or a day to go to the UAE and beat Afghanistan, right? That's going to be a challenge for you. So I think it's sometimes actually the Asian sides it's a bit more kind of developed to the conditions that they exist in, and it's easy to hate on these players.
Yeah,
me and you both live in the UK. We know that what the relationship between England and the cricket team is where the cricket team is a perennial joke almost, right? So it's a kind of strange one. I also think, and I'd be interested to get your view on this and how this relates to Bangladesh, is that T20 cricket tactics change quite a bit. We're gonna, a World Cup's every 2 years, which maybe is a bit too frequent. But in a 2-year cycle, you do see things change quite dramatically, right? I going back to kind of the original conversation around this Bangladesh 11 is at this moment in time, it seems to be you turn up with 16 good overs and hope you can kind of figure out the other four with your part-timers. That's going to work for people. That's not going to work for people. That might be in vogue by the time we get to this World Cup. But, in 2 years' time, it'll be something totally different, right? It'll be...
Yeah. No, it's a really good point that you make. And I think, obviously conditions play a huge part in all of this. And conditions to an extent kind of shape, the mindset as well, don't they? So like I was saying about this kind of real sort of conservative strain within Bangladesh cricket. So you look at some of the pitches that they play on, and you're absolutely right. You play in Mirpur and Dhaka as a batter primarily, and you get to sort of 15 runs, and that's an achievement in itself, right? So they're all of these kind of things are quite relative, I suppose.
Torian, I need to ask you one final question before we wrap this up. Or move on to what happens next. You mentioned it before. What happened with Hatu and Bangladesh? Why is Chandika Hatharasinghe not in the dugout currently?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I mean, I think, I'd say it was weird. I think his second stint. So I think he was in post. I want to say for about a year, maybe a bit longer.
Because his first stint was quite long, wasn't it? It was like 4 or 5 years.
It was, yeah. And I think actually his second stint, maybe it was closer to 2 years, maybe even a bit longer. But basically, so he came back. So he came back into the fold, basically because the previous BCB CEO basically wanted him back. If you get this a lot, don't you? You get this with football managers as well a lot, don't you? Where there's a certain manager or coach that's renowned for either being a disciplinarian or the exact opposite, which means that the next coach has to be the exact opposite because what we need someone who's not as relaxed and who's going to kind of really kind of give the hairdryer treatment when it's needed. So Hashrasinghe was brought in because of that. So the guy previous to him, South African coach, who's Russell Domingo, quite low profile anyway, and quite a not a huge presence, shall we say. So anyway, Hashrasinghe came in to kind of as a bit of an antidote to all of that. And stunning result against Pakistan in that series last year, which up until that point the greatest, and probably still is, the greatest Test series that Bangladesh have ever played in. But even then, there were kind of murmurings of discontent within the, I'd say, within the dressing room. So I think he basically wasn't very popular with the players. And there were reports, again, I hope I'm not liable. Well, there were reports of some sort of altercations between a player and Hashrasinghe. I think this goes back to, I'm not sure if it was a 23 World Cup. Maybe it was a World Cup or another kind of tournament, either an Asia Cup or maybe it was a 23 World Cup. But there were sort of reports of some sort of altercations. So he was kind of pretty unpopular, I would say, with the dressing room. And then, and so obviously there was a change of kind of BCB CEO, around about this time last year, sort of following the installation of a new sort of interim government over in Bangladesh. So with that, there was a new CEO who came in, and they didn't see eye to eye at all. And I think it was almost the new CEO almost kind of wanted to sack him as soon as he could. And then the reasons for sacking him were quite kind of spurious. So I think basically he had taken too many sort of days of annual leave, that more than what was stipulated in his contract, and then so there's all the kind of a little bit flimsy, and then Hashrasinghe, I suppose, to his credit, and also he's got a reputation to maintain. In terms of his sort of future career, I think he's gone back to Australia. But
I think he's running a cricket academy in Australia with Rangana Herath there for
right. But so he really quite strongly disputed all of the allegations that were sent against him in terms of his dismissal. That's kind of the abridged version, I guess, of why he came back and why he left. But for me, it seemed like a weird kind of appointment in the first place. It was always felt like one of those appointments that wasn't going to end well.
I think both of his stints were longer than his time in Sri Lanka. I think he was about 18 months with Sri Lanka.
Right.
He came in, Sri Lanka poached him, basically, or kind of brought him back home. He was doing quite an incredible job with your boys, and then kind of got him to SL, and again, the players didn't really take to him. Is what the kind of story is, right? Discipline, and fitness isn't something that too many players didn't enjoy his standards. It's interesting to me that it's Ranganahara that he's working with, not because Ranganahara wasn't somebody who's somebody who had discipline issues or fitness issues.
Yeah,
I think it's because Ranganahara was famous in SL for his level of professionalism, right? And now they kind of formed the kind of coaching team together. Which is fascinating.
Yeah, just on that, I can't remember which series this was, but it was anyway, it was a series in Bangladesh a couple of years ago, so I went over to cover it, and Sahatra Singh, I think, had been kind of newly appointed. So I asked him, in the presser, in terms of you're seen as a kind of a disciplinarian, how do do you see that in yourself? How do you sort of view yourself as a coach, I suppose? And he kind of laughed it off a little bit, and then kind of talked about how, I think was his father, has he got a military background or an army background?
Oh, I'm not sure about that, possibly.
But then he was saying his mother was, I don't know, it's like a teacher, so he's saying, yeah, well, that's the soft side of me, kind of there. But yeah, so yeah, an interesting chat. And just to go off on a complete tangent, I was just talking. Actually, I've been speaking quite a bit with another renowned Sri Lankan coach who was there during the Silverwood era, Naveed Nawaz.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So he's the head coach of the Bangladesh under-19s who were in the UK for a couple of weeks. They went back home yesterday. So, had a couple of chats with him over the course of the last week or two. Seemed like a very nice chat.
Yeah, I think I've chatted to him somewhere along the line at some point when he's been over here. And he was lovely. He's got quite a good reputation for being quite a nice guy, and also developing young bowlers as well. I don't know what your under-19 squad was looking like that was coming over here. Any talents we should be looking out for?
Yeah, so it was all a bit of a damp squib in the end, and a bit disappointing because it's so rare for any Bangladesh team, men's, women's, age groups, to be invited over for a bilateral series. Just doesn't happen. Hasn't happened since 2010, in fact. Well, actually, that's a lie. The under-19s were here in 2019, which would have been the last kind of time any Bangladesh team came over for a bilateral. So yeah, they came over for 5 ODIs, but you're going to invite a team over for 5 ODIs in September, and you're only going to play on one kind of main county ground. So they had 2 games up in Loughborough, a game at Bristol, and then 2 at Beckenham. So those outgrounds, the drainage isn't nowhere near as good as the main sort of first class grounds. The covers aren't as good. So basically they had 3 games that were kind of rained off. However, they beat the 2 games up in Loughborough, was covering them, and they beat England by 87 runs in that.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was quite a.
Was it a total Nepo England team with like Michael Vaughan's kid, Rocky Flintoff?
Playing, so yeah, you've got the Flintoffs and the Vaughans, but none of those were in the team. But that said, they're really you look at experience-wise, a lot of that England under-19 teams, they played in the Metrobank 50 over comp just a couple of weeks back, and some of them had played sort of first-class experience. Marinal, so the guy that two under-19s then to look out for. So on the Bangladesh side, a guy called Rizan Hosam, who's an all-rounder, batting all-rounder. So he scored 100 in the first game, took a couple of wickets, I want to say, with his medium pace. I think he scored, I want to say, 40 or 50 in that second game, which they lost. He's one to look out for from the Bangladesh side. And from the England side, Moeen Ali's nephew, a guy called Ishaq Mohammed, who you've probably heard of already. Yeah, plays at Worcestershire. So he scored 100 in that second ODI. And just, I don't know if it's what do they call it? Confirmation bias, but you sort of just look at him setting up in the crease, and he does, he's a left-hander. He's got that sort of bat held up there, and you just think he looks like Moen, and just that easy kind of follow through, just sweetly timed sixes here, there, and everywhere. But yeah, one to look out for as well.
Interesting, fascinating stuff. Tony, should we wrap it up for today? A great, fabulous game of cricket. I mean, the Asia Cup was showing signs of life on Saturday when Sri Lanka played Bangladesh. It kind of, I thought Sunday was a bit of a damp squib, if anything, or squid. The lack of the handshakes really annoyed me, but we won't get into that now because we've been nearly going at this for an hour. Yesterday, we almost had a huge upset. Should have had a huge upset if Hong Kong could hold on to their fielding. And today, finally, Bangladesh have opened it all up again, haven't they? There is life in this tournament, in this group stages of the tournament. Yet we'll be back on this channel on Thursday, reacting to whatever happens when Sri Lanka play Afghanistan. Hopefully, from my perspective, hopefully Sri Lanka get the win, and it's all nice and comfortable, and we all sail through to the next round. But these are three teams where absolutely anything can happen, and quite often everything does happen. We'll be back then. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe. Thank you all for watching. See you all later. Bye.